Welcome to Skip the First Episode, the podcast where we try to get our friends into the things we love. I'm Phil.
And I'm Jeremiah.
And today, the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
Oh boy.
Jeremiah, what do you know about the Marvel Cinematic Universe?
Well, I know they're not cinema. Mr. Scorsese made that abundantly clear.
Harsh words starting out. Wow. You take the opinions of one man, as good as a filmmaker as he is, you take his one man's opinion, both barrels, out of the gate.
I just want to turn everyone against me.
No.
From the beginning.
For the listeners who don't know, I mean, I can't imagine you're listening to this episode without knowing this. Scorsese famously said, what was it?
He was asked what he thinks of Marvel, and he said, I've tried, but they're not cinema.
That's right. We brought that up in the skippable first episode.
But of course, he went on to elaborate that he doesn't think television is cinema either. And he's directed television. I mean, I don't know. I don't think it's an insult to say something isn't cinema.
Well, I think that there was at least an implication of, and therefore it's not as good as the beautiful stuff that I make, which I think that was hiding beneath that. And this is from a guy who, when I saw him, he was interviewed as an extra on The Public Enemy, the original Jimmy Cagney one from like the early 30s.
I thought you were going to say A Shark's Tale.
No, he was on there and he made a point that I didn't even notice. I walked out of this old 30s movie going, wow, that was one of the most violent movies I've ever seen. And then he pointed out that all of the violence is off stage and it's your theater of the mind that's filling it all in, which is why it's so effective and why it feels so violent, is that it's implying a bunch of stuff that you can't help but know what's going on, and then you fill it in. And he points that out and then acknowledges within the same breath, I don't do that. I show all the violence, but hey, you know, different strokes for different folks or something, he says, which I thought was very cute and very funny, but he's not even taking his own advice. So if his advice is it's not cinema, but he also acknowledges that something was effective and he never uses it, who are we to believe, Jeremiah? Whom are we to believe?
What, he has to use every tool in the toolbox?
That is fair. That is fair. What a cordial debate we're having.
Well, and also we can move this to a different section of the episode because
Absolutely.
I still need to give my explanation non-facetiously, but
yes. Well, no, keep it here because we've now got people interested in watching The Public Enemy. We've got 3 people interested.
Yes. Yes,
right.
It's important. And also it's why, I'm very pro Scorsese, both as a director, but also as a champion of cinema, as someone who has been a great advocate, not only for preserving cinema, but educating people.
Absolutely.
He's someone worth listening to terms of...
I thought it was an interesting opinion. I think Scorsese's opinions aside, what do you know? I mean, even opinions aside, what do you know about it? Like, do you know anything about the cinematic universe?
What I know...
We're just talking about MCU here. We're not talking necessarily comic books, although you can bring it there if you want.
To be honest, I think it's made me realize how little I actually know about the Marvel Universe just with the comics.
Right.
I knew about the Hulk, I knew about Spider-Man, but that's about it because there were movies about them probably. Those characters came up every so often when I was growing up. I know that it begins with Iron Man.
Right.
Directed by Jon Favreau.
Yes.
At some point, Disney bought Marvel, and so the Iron Man movies sort of got swept into this Marvel Cinematic Universe, which was a series of overlapping movies that introduce various Marvel characters that interact. And is that...
Yeah, I mean, so far everything you've said is true. It seems like you know the grand scheme and not many specifics.
Yeah, that's fair, because I've tried a couple ways of getting into them. I tried to watch Iron Man. I didn't really connect to that. It's very Bush era for me. A lot of war on terror type of stuff.
Yeah.
I watched the most acclaimed Marvel entry, which I think is fair to say Black Panther. It was nominated for Best Picture, so that seemed like a good candidate. And it was just a bit too steeped in Marvel lore. Like, I remember the first few minutes, I have no idea what's happening.
I am so glad you said that because that's, believe it or not, basically how I started. And everyone said, oh, they really explain what's going on. And I go, they explain it to assuming you've seen at least a few because they talk about vibranium but don't really give any details as to like what the parameters of it are. It's strong, but like how strong and like what are its limitations, and you don't get that. And then it also picks up I think the whole movie takes place 2 weeks after the events of Captain America Civil War, which is this huge pivotal movie, which is all the Avengers are in it. Like, it's called Captain America Civil War. It might as well have been called the Avengers Civil War. And I think you kind of need to know what's going on there for you to really appreciate Black Panther.
Right.
Personally, I do. I mean, I like knowing what's going on. I'm a pretty active viewer, so if I'm missing something, I find it distracting and irritating.
And that's why I've found them fairly impenetrable, because it felt like I either had to start from the very beginning or, I mean, there didn't seem to be a second option.
So I agree with you. I'm actually, in spite of our podcast name, there's a lot of things that I do have to kind of admit, I would start at the first one and just muscle through. I'm going to admit something. Two things. I'm your guide for the MCU. I think more because I just have seen them and thus know more about them than you do.
Yes, we should make it clear. We're doing this subject because I asked you to. You were put in this position because you have more experience with this than I do, to say the least.
Right. Not the most experience one could have, but more experience. Yeah.
Typically, the idea is that we're discussing subjects that we're passionate about. We're bending that rule slightly with this, just because, for me at least, it's trying to wrap my head around one of the major, film franchises and, one of the most popular.
Yeah, and to be fair, I really do enjoy these movies. I like them a lot.
Yeah.
They were a surprise. I'll put it this way. They were a surprise to me how much I really loved them. But I wouldn't say I'm your best guide, because just to say my history, and I watched them because my friends liked them and I didn't know anything about them, and I just said, like, yeah, you know what, I should watch these, and I sat down and watched them with them as my guide. But they were like big fans of the comics, big fans of the movies, big fans of the TV shows, and they got me to be big fans of the movies. So I am your guide for the MCU. I wouldn't say I could really link it too much, except tangentially what they told me about the comics. For example, you've seen Iron Man. At the end of Iron Man, he reveals he's Iron Man. In the comics, he doesn't do that. The whole thing is he's like basically Batman, hiding it from everybody. So that was a huge thing for a lot of fans of the comics, where like, oh, this is straying. This is its own universe. Not necessarily better or worse, but this is a different story. So you don't know whom to expect. I mean, sometimes there are good guys in the comics that turn out to be bad guys in the movies, or bad guys in the comics that turn out to be the good guy in the comics, in the movies. Yeah. And so like they are playing with it, and you don't totally know what to expect. By the end of it, they produce some extremely well done cinema. They go from making some fun superhero movies into making movies that happen to be superhero movies that have a lot of depth, poignant moments. It's not an Italian neorealism film, but it's trying to do something more. I also will say this. I happen to have watched basically my recommendation to you. Guardians of the Galaxy, I think, is a really good way to start. I have two, and I'm going to let you pick which one you want. Guardians of the Galaxy or Doctor Strange, I think, are really nice because A, they're standalone, and B, I think, especially in the case of Guardians, there's a lot of heart to it. So actually, maybe I'll just say Guardians. If you have time and you want to do Doctor Strange, I think that those are two very good movies that don't really require much, but they're really fun, they're cool, they're really engrossing, and they might get you to want to watch more. And just kind of, I'll say it, I think that the initial first few films are tough. I think Iron Man, Iron Man 2, anything with an Avenger in it can be a little bit on the bang, bang, punch, punch side. And I don't think there's as much that might appeal to someone who's looking for something a little bit more. Guardians is one of those ones where I think you can really appreciate more than just the exciting scenes. There's more to enjoy.
Well, based on what I know, and I know very little about Guardians, except that it's written and directed by someone whose name eludes me. It's written and directed by the guy who wrote Romeo and Juliet. I know that much.
You mean like Romeo plus Juliet?
So Troma, sort of low-budget, independent, sort of like the Roger Corman, I would say, of the 80s, except they...
Oh, Tromeo. I'm sorry, I misheard you. Tromeo and Juliet. Oh, okay, I didn't know that. You're talking about James Gunn.
James Gunn, yes. Now, see, because I might as well get some of my concerns out of the way. I'll just say, when it comes to Marvel in general, I loved the Sam Raimi Spider-Man movies, especially the second one. Mm-hmm. I loved Into the Spider-Verse. I haven't at this time seen the sequel. And people are going to hate me for this, I even enjoyed Ang Lee's Hulk.
I did too.
See, I love the Marvel things that don't count. And in some cases, and Ang Lee's Hulk especially, I could tell at the time, everyone involved felt we shouldn't have done this. This was this was a mistake that needs to be corrected. But it's like, no. Okay, fine.
I mean, to be fair, that one definitely doesn't count, because the Incredible Hulk that does count is the one that was written by Zach Penn.
Exactly.
You have actually picked very few that have counted. The Spider-Man ones are technically in it, and now they're definitely in it because I think Disney then bought...
because of the multiverse tie-in, yeah.
That too.
But my point is, the ones that I'm drawn to, because I'm not a snob when it comes to blockbusters or superhero movies in general, but I do tend to gravitate towards films with a unique visual style and really have a director's stamp on them, which Sam Raimi does. Into the Spider-Verse. Right. These are fun mainstream movies, but they have a lot of the qualities that I look for in film. My understanding of the way Marvel works is that when they hire a director, the director tends to direct the scenes with the actors, but they have less of an influence on the action scenes, which tend to be in production sometimes years in advance, because these are massive productions. And that's why, for example, when Edgar Wright was hired to direct Ant-Man, he left the production, they said, for artistic differences. As Harry Shearer said when he left Saturday Night Live, I was creative, they were different. My understanding is that because he was just being hired to direct the actors and not do the action scenes. It's like, well, if I'm not doing the action scenes, what's the point? I mean, if you get Edgar Wright to do a film, it's like you want his style.
Had they not seen Baby Driver?
Exactly. Well, yeah, that's the point. Like, for example, a Mad Max Fury Road.
Sure.
What if George Miller only directed the dialogue and not, exactly. I mean, what's the you don't want to see, it's his, he has a unique style. He also, was insisted on a lot of practical effects, a lot of stunts, a lot of things that a lot of directors frankly would not want to subject anyone to.
Right.
So that's why these are and again, I'm fully prepared to give this a fair shake. However, having said all that, my understanding about James Gunn, in this instance, he is he has a voice that just happens to connect very well with the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
You're actually hitting on another reason I picked this one, is that it is one of the first, it's not the first, but it's one of the first that did feel a bit like there was an auteur behind it, as opposed to just kind of, let's make a movie. I mean, Guardians feels that way. Doctor Strange is very different. And then I was going to say this, if I could, I would have said something like Thor Ragnarok by Taika Waititi. I think in a way, I'd love for that to be the one that I could recommend to you. Unfortunately, it's Thor 3. It's just, you need to have seen at least the other Thor movies. And frankly, you need to have seen a lot at that point. The problem with this one is that the way I think you should get into this is sit down and just watch all the movies, because you start to appreciate it, I would say, a good half dozen movies in, you start to go, oh, there is a trajectory here. So if I could and there was time, I'd have you sit down and watch about 6 or 7 movies, and they would be just, Iron Man 1, Incredible Hulk, Iron Man 2, etc., and just go through all of them, because about halfway through it, you start to not only appreciate that there is something building here and you can feel it, but the movies start getting better, and you'll have, in my opinion, the weakest ones just out of the way. When I start here, you unfortunately have to go back and start watching what I would say are some of the weaker ones. Guardians, to me, is an imperfect way to start, but I think it might be the way to get you to go, wow, these are reaching for something. There's a trajectory here. Like, the action sequences are fun. The dialogue is pithy and witty. There's some depth to the story, and it does a good job of showing you what an installment can be like while still fitting in. And you've kind of hit on something that I was going to wonder whether I should say before or after, which is that there is an author behind this that's really prominent. These are all the reasons why I think you might like him, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, no, I'm fully prepared to give this my full attention, my full embrace.
I'll say this too, the other way that one could do this, and this is only because there's someone that I know that stumbled into it this way, they watched WandaVision, which is such an amazing program that I almost picked it. because
I've actually seen. I forgot to mention. I've actually seen WandaVision.
Great, then I won't recommend that because we're seeing it. But I'll just say that they were intrigued to watch the other ones just because how good it was, and it's spoiler heavy. I mean, you find out a lot about what happens in the previous movies. You know a lot of who's alive, who's dead, like what happened, but they just loved how clever it was.
Yeah, I did watch WandaVision. It was interesting to a point until it started introducing all these Marvel elements, and I'm like, all right, I don't know what's happening anymore.
Once it stopped being the Dick Van Dyke Show.
It's like I like the Dick Van Dyke part, but what is this?
Once it even got to the Brady Bunch, I was out. I was an F Troop man and nothing else. Nothing past Mannix.
I was waiting for it to, I don't know, become Night Court, or like, this isn't what I watched growing up.
Well, I think this is a good place. I want to hear, I have nothing left to to intrigue you.
You have nothing left to give. I
have nothing left to give.
This
I have
is your
nothing left to
imparting.
intrigue you, so I just say, go ahead and.
Yeah, no, I'll do it. We'll see.
All right. Well, we'll see you on the other side, Jeremiah.
On the other side of the Guardians of the Galaxy. Oh,
so I mean, sorry. After you, Alphonse.
We are back.
We are, and I'll open the floor to you, Jeremiah, before I launch into anything. Want to sum up what you just saw?
Yes. So, dear listener, in the span of one podcast, I've gone from knowing precious little about this entire series to trying to summarize a single film. So I'll ask you your kind indulgence. Okay, so the film opens in the 80s, and we meet a young Chris Pratt, whose name is Peter Quill. I totally didn't just look that up.
I think you'll find it's Star-Lord.
Well, he's not Star-Lord yet. He's a child.
Wow. He is, always has been, and always will be Star-Lord.
Okay, I'm sorry. Look.
Don't you remember the letter? I'm kidding. I'm totally kidding.
No, I already forgot the letter. Anyway.
His mom calls him Star-Lord in the letter. Sorry.
Oh, yeah, that's like the major revel.
Oh, so cute.
We're getting ahead of ourselves.
He's
Peter
Do you want to start
Quill.
over? Let me start over.
He's
I'm going to pretend
child.
that
No,
I
it's
haven't
okay.
asked you anything. Jeremiah,
okay.
summarize the movie a la Leonard Maltin. 3 sentences and go. No.
Okay, so the film opens in the 80s, and we meet a young Peter Quill, who's a child and listening to classic 70s music on his Walkman. And then he's escorted into a room where his mother is dying from cancer. So right off the bat, we're in interesting territory here.
Yeah, it's dark from the beginning.
Yeah, I didn't expect cancer. That really smacked me in the face. So his mother dies, and he runs outside, and he's picked up by a spacecraft. Cut to 26 years later. Peter he's come up in the world. He's going by the name Star-Lord, and he's stealing an orb of unknown origin, and some people come along, or things, people, I don't know what they are, but they're sent by someone named Ronan, who's a disreputable character. Ronan, they want the orb,
to say the least.
He's a real bad
Yeah,
apple.
he's been putting graffiti on stuff, as well as
Real nasty character. Yeah,
killing people as well. Yeah,
so they want the orb, and he doesn't want to give it to them, and he's even the people who picked him up from Earth, some guy named Yondu, is that his name? Yondu.
Very good.
Even he's headed up to here. He said, "Come on, my people wanted to eat you, and now you're doing. I rescued you as a child. You could have been eaten, but now you do this." So he puts a bounty on him. He wants him alive.
I mean, it does beg the question of, but had you not picked him up in your spaceship, nobody would have ever wanted to eat Quill, or probably not.
We were just picking up dinner on Earth.
So it's sort of a catch-22, but
picked up a perfectly good child.
Yeah. Turned out our dinner he was useful. He could crawl into the places to steal stuff.
We agreed beforehand we were going to eat a child. And then I decided I fucked up the evening's activities when I said, we're not going to eat this child. And they said, well, what are we going to eat now?
And aren't you happy with me, Quill, that I picked you up? Everyone wanted to eat you, and I made sure they didn't.
So he puts a bounty on him. This is probably way too. But otherwise, I don't know how to simplify this more. I'm trying. Skip to the end. Well, no, because we haven't even met. So he has this orb. He tries to sell it, and then he gets attacked by a woman, a green woman named Gamera. Gamera. Is that her theme song?
Well, it's Gamera's theme song. The other Gamera, not this one. The one that fights. Anyway, kaiju.
Oh,
she's Gamora. Gamera is the big lizard.
So they get in a fight.
The 70s.
Peter is spotted by a bounty hunter who happens to be a talking raccoon, whose best friend is a tree, and in his spare time he's a stockbroker. No, that's a upper class twit of the year. But his best friend is a tree. I did not make that part up.
A tree-like humanoid, yes.
Yeah, who very impressively can say up to 3 words. Like the moment the tree started to speak, I said, "No way can this tree speak." This film is really straining credulity at this point, but it's only 3 words, so I said, okay, I accept 3 words. And those 3 words are "I am Groot."
Yes. Well, he learns a 4th word at the end, but I don't want to get ahead.
Okay, but we're getting
there.
way ahead.
Sorry.
So,
skip to the end. I keep skipping to the end.
So Rocket, the raccoon, Rocket Raccoon,
yes,
wants to capture Peter so he can claim the bounty. But like, just all the whole plan goes haywire because they all get arrested by what is it, Nova Corps?
Yes.
Is that it?
Yes.
Is that what it's called?
Yes.
What is Nova Corps?
It's just the government on that, on the planet.
Because if I were just watching this movie, I would assume Nova Corps was Earth, or that this was humanity of the future. But no, this film is set in 2014.
Yeah, I mean they're just the government,
the space government,
on
right?
This, yeah.
So they get arrested and they get sent to a prison. One of the inmates is Lloyd Kaufman, co-founder of Troma. A nice little nod to James Gunn's roots there.
There you go.
So, like, while they're in the prison, Gamera is a pariah.
Gamora.
Gamora?
Yep.
Fuck.
Yes. No, that's what I was saying, is Gamera is the lizard from the kaiju films from Japan.
So I've been... Oh,
Gamora.
God. So people already hate me for this, don't they?
I think they hate you because you hadn't seen a Marvel movie yet, and it's 2023.
But I've just made it worse because I've been saying Gamera, but it's Gamora.
Yeah, and I think it's worse because I told you it was Gamora 3 times.
Right, and I wasn't listening, and I'm sorry. But it's
Totally
spelled Gamera, isn't it?
I thought it was O, but
I could swear.
Gamora.
Oh, okay. No, you're right.
But in her language, it's probably not even letters that we can even comprehend.
It's because I spelled it wrong in my notes, and that's why I've been saying it that way.
You spelled it correctly if we were talking about the kaiju films.
If we were talking about the kaiju films, yes.
Yeah.
Okay, Gamora. Am I going to have to go back and just edit Gamora into every...
No, because I think it's very funny that you're talking about the giant monster from the 60s. Or the fire-breathing prehistoric
Gamora.
turtle.
Gamora is a pariah because she is the daughter of Thanos, or the adopted daughter. But again, we're getting ahead of ourselves. And but no, she makes it clear that she's gone rogue and she wants the orb so she can sell it. And everyone else is like, hey, we can get on board with that. The Guardians of the Galaxy, what become known as Guardians of the Galaxy, they all meet in prison. They decide they're gonna sell this orb. So they break out. They go to some kind of space Vegas where Benicio del Toro is the collector who they're going to sell the orb to. He gives them way too much information about this fucking orb. No, I'm kidding. Important info dump. He explains that this is in fact an Infinity Stone, and that it's very powerful when wielded by powerful people. Or if several people want to shoulder the burden, they can do that as well and risk their destruction. What? He says that.
That's so good. No, it's really good. No, because then that pays off, right? Exactly.
They set it up, they pay it off. And then his slave, for lack of, she is a slave, and she decides to demonstrate the power of this Infinity Stone by touching it and destroying everything.
Yeah, it was not a great moment in her career,
no.
I think. Well, no, I guess, as you said, she's probably a slave.
I think being a slave
actually.
was probably a worse...
I always thought that she was hired, but, she probably is a slave.
She says, I will not be your slave before she touches it.
Yeah, that's true. So, yeah, she probably was not hired.
Yeah, I'm taking her at her word that she's a slave.
Again, her performance review is going to go down, considering that she not only tried to grab the orb, the Infinity Stone, and, get away. But she also destroyed his entire collection, which is literally his name. Is this whole thing.
Without his collection, he's nothing. I've seen that he's in other films. So, like, what does he do? What purpose does he serve?
It's just emptiness.
I hope the sequel deals with her performance review. I hope that becomes a major factor.
So, under strengths, you've got loyalty. I don't know if I agree with that one. Under cons, you've got picking up Infinity Stones. Not a good idea, even when you're not under review. So, yeah.
Right, so Ronan shows up. He and Drax fight. There's a space battle, and Nebula, who's played by Amy Pond.
Yes, I was hoping you'd enjoy that.
Blows up Gamora's ship, sending her in and the orb into space. So Ronan, or his people, or both, they get the orb. Peter has to make a sacrifice to save Gamora by going into the cold vacuum of space and putting his helmet on hers, his helmet on her head.
Be a bit daft if we had him, putting a helmet on a helmet.
Oi. So to cut a long story short,
no, we're way beyond that. Continue.
Yeah, they realize that Ronan has the orb, which is the one thing they didn't want to happen. They're like, fuck. Okay, so if we go after Ronan, he'll kill all of us. But if Ronan has the Infinity Stone, he'll destroy everything. So it's kind of like And so they decide, this band of misfits become the titular guardians of the galaxy. And there's a space battle. Groot sacrifices himself. He says, "We are Groot." It's very touching. I love the underlying socialist message of this film. You really picked well for me. Yes. That was Bernie Sanders' 2020 slogan. We are Groot. Not Groot, us.
We are Groot.
We are Groot.
There's millionaires and billionaires out there trying to stop ragtag ragamuffins from coalescing and becoming, guardians. They're great.
And then, the Ronan, he uses the Infinity Stone and something called a Warhammer, which they destroy. So then they have the stone. Peter has it in his hand. But then they all, together, they join. They shoulder the burden of this Infinity Stone, and they destroy Ronan. And so he's dead. Yay! Then there's so I'm skip to the end.
Skip the other two steps. Yeah.
What two steps am I skipping?
So yes, they defeat Ronan, and at that point, you're right. I mean, you're basically there, and then at the end, it turns out he has a present. Remember?
He has a present from his mother. Yes, another
and then
mixtape.
In the letter, you find out that she was the one who called him Star-Lord.
Oh my goodness!
So
yes.
Cute. So
how is that?
No, you summed that up. You definitely.
I guess it's not so much a summary. We basically just sat through the entire movie.
I'll put it this way: the Wikipedia article is shorter than your summary. That's a good summary. There is a couple things I want to get into about what you said, and a couple things that you didn't say. But before I do that, what did you take away from it? What were your thoughts?
Well, okay, before I give any impressions, I want to there's something I wanted to say, because I wanted to say this in the first half. So do not read into this. This is not me reviewing the film. So my dad had a saying. He said it was a quote, but I could never source the quote. The saying was, mediocre bread, permissible. Mediocre pastry, immoral. Because with bread, bread can be delicious, but it doesn't need to be. Whereas pastry only has one purpose, and that's to be delicious. And that's why when it comes to films that are only meant to be entertaining, I tend to be harder on those than I would on... So
sorry, is this the bread or the pastry?
Oh, pastry. I tend to be harder on pastry. So it's like meaning if a film only has one purpose, and that's to be entertaining,
okay, I see what you're saying.
Tend to be harder on those than I would if the film is like bread. It can be entertaining, but it can also be interesting. It can teach you something about humanity, that sort of thing. That's why when people say, go easy on it, it's just supposed to be a good time. And I say, okay, well, it had one job. What I'm saying is that's why I tend to be harder on those films than otherwise. Again, don't read into this. This is not my...
But I see where you're going with this, and I guess I would just counter that. One could argue that this is the bread.
Yes, and people have made that argument.
Because bread just has one job. And pastry has a lot of nuance to it.
Bread doesn't have one job, though.
I see it as a palette, like it's simple.
Bread is a staple of life, and it can be used for many things. Pastry only has one purpose. You eat it to enjoy it. You see what I mean? bread is for nourishment.
I do, but I'm gonna make the argument that bread is simple and has one job, and it's there as the.
I should have predicted that we would have differing views on this.
So
but
I would argue that bread is simple and is the canvas on which you typically add more things. Doesn't do much. A pastry is
which
there
I think
and it
plays
has nuance.
into. I think that plays into the metaphor.
Well, yeah, but a pastry has a lot of things going on it, and you kind of come away really analyzing it. I don't know if there's much analysis to do on this movie, but something like, say, an Ingmar Bergman film, I would almost say is more like the pastry, because you're looking at it going, I'm going to go into this, and I better come out with more than just, I saw a movie. I saw a movie that made me think, that made me want to analyze it, that made me think about my own life. Like, so I would almost argue that this is the bread.
Okay.
And that you should go easy on
so
it. At the risk of alienating everybody.
My point is that the pastry has to be delicious, and if it's not delicious, then what's the point? Anyway, this is all building up to me saying this was a good pastry.
Okay.
This was a good pastry.
Cut all that I just said then.
It tasted good, and I enjoyed it. And so you chose well. You chose, for the first time ever, I actually enjoyed one of these movies. That's what this was all building up to.
Which is also good, because I thought for the first time ever you enjoyed something that I recommended.
I wanted to, I knew I was going to lead you down a road where you thought, oh no, where's this, what's this good?
Yeah.
What's happening?
That's good. And so I want to, before I go into it myself, like, what was it that made you go, oh, I did enjoy this? Like, what were just some of the things that...
I think partly because it's seemingly a self-contained story. There is a lot of the Marvel world building, but it all works because, again, I know about Thanos. Okay. I'd heard of Infinity Stones. I know there's a movie down the line called Infinity War. I can...
You're connecting the dots.
And also, I know what happens in that. I mean, it's hard to exist in the world and not know what happens at the end of Infinity War.
You'd be surprised. My parents are don't even know. So
I knew all of that. And actually, I think by choosing a movie that happens in the middle, that was actually really well chosen, because I could follow this. And I am curious to know, we can get into this later. Is this the first film where we see Thanos?
Yeah, he shows up at the post-credit sequence of the Avengers, which was like the summary film of the first four, or excuse me, the first five.
I should have guessed that. But yeah, it doesn't hurt this movie whether or not I've seen Thanos before.
One interesting thing that you didn't touch on in your summary.
What are you talking about? I covered everything.
You covered everything. You didn't mention the fact that Ronan is working for Thanos.
Oh, yeah.
And honestly, what's interesting, this is kind of...
I thought that was so obvious it need not be mentioned, Phil.
No. I'm not saying that because of that, but it's just more like, what I love about these movies is that they are self-contained. Mm-hmm. You can watch them, and that the MacGuffin of a movie turns out to be the absolute cornerstone of another movie. The MacGuffin of this movie turns out to be an Infinity Stone, but spoiler alert, this is all coalescing into a bigger story about how Thanos is trying to collect all the Infinity Stones for nefarious purposes. So just one makes Ronan a badass, but like getting all of them,
oh shit!
Whoa, that's like,
damn.
Compounds upon itself. Yeah. And so you sort of see Thanos occasionally, and it turns out he's actually much bigger in the whole universe that this whole thing's setting up.
Yeah, and this is the first time where I watched one of them and I sort of felt the grandeur of this universe in a way that wasn't alienating, where I'm not just sitting on the outside saying, I don't know what to make of this.
Yeah.
This was like a good sort of picking up point. It's a solid space adventure. In fact, I think it's doing Star Wars better than Disney has actually handled Star Wars.
Yes, I 100% agree with that.
In fact, I can see why in 2014 people would think, oh yeah, I bet a Disney-run Star Wars would actually be decent. And guess what?
Yeah.
In a lot of ways, this is the type of movie that I dreamt of when I was maybe 12. And I mean, in the sense of, this is the type of movie I wanted to make.
Wow. Yeah.
Even down to the raccoon. I had my own sassy raccoon character, which I created not from having read any of these comics, but just from growing up in Maine. And, but I had my own sassy raccoon. Like, I would dream up this kind of world, but then I would put like Roger Rabbit in it,
right?
Without having to justify why a cartoon character is interacting with all this other stuff. I mean, that's the kind of stuff I would come up with. And so I think in a way, these films deliver a sort of wish fulfillment, I think, for our generation, especially because this is the kind of movie that we sort of wanted to exist when we were younger, but didn't.
Well, evidence for that is just how nostalgic this one is for the 80s.
Yes.
In the 70s with Walkman and
Yep.
the whole gestalt being that type of...
Yeah. And that's why, again, like, I can appreciate this movie, but I think also for me, it's that appreciation it's limited just because, my idea of what a great film is different from what it was when I was 12. And comparing it to Star Wars, obviously I have a great affection for Star Wars from childhood. That hasn't really left childhood. Like, even if the perfect Star Wars movie came out that just hit every nostalgic pleasure center, it would still be kind of a hollow experience for me. Like, it's good, but it's also, do I really care that much?
It's tough. I mean, the movies, in my opinion, in Star Wars were so disappointing. I mean, this is a totally different topic, but I'm going to go on it anyway, that I didn't even bother with the TV shows until someone whose opinion I really do respect, and they're usually aligned with mine, said like Mandalorian was really good. And that's what got me back into it, is that the Mandalorian was pretty much everything I ever wanted out of a Star Wars.
Yeah.
Stuff like the Mandalorian actually really came through.
Yeah.
And did a much more... Ooh, wait, are we actually doing a different episode right now? I highly recommend watching the Mandalorian.
Well, I think there's definitely parallels to be drawn here, because whether I can get into the rest of, the Marvel universe or not, it's clear that they got something right with this that they did not get right with Star Wars.
Yeah. Or maybe I would even, to link it back to this, maybe not with Iron Man. I mean, you saw Iron Man, it didn't connect, you gave up. And again, had I not had my guides sitting me there going, this all is going to be really, really good. And they actually liked Iron Man, but even I was kind of like, it's just, when it's more explosions than story, I tend to just... It's fine. I'm not going to walk away going like necessarily that was a waste of time, but it also doesn't totally grab me. What you also need to know is that when they made these movies, this was an absolute gamble. Because A, they were gambling with, let's make a huge sprawling universe out of this, which is a gamble.
So they really did intend that from the beginning.
It was pretty much there. I mean, that's why the post-credit sequence of the very first movie is, I'm assembling some things that I'm going to eventually call the Avengers Initiative. They're setting it up immediately. In fact, one of the producers said, listen, I got you the money. Have fun with this. I think this idea is a little hard to pull off. Not that saying you can't, and I think he left. I think he just was like, I'm leaving the project in your hands. The other thing that strapped them was that, and I may be getting this wrong, because again, I'm not as big of a fan of the comics as, like, say, the people that told me what I'm about to tell you and what I've read. The history of it is that this was a relatively successful comic book company, Marvel, that was rival to DC, and they were producing a lot of really popular stuff. I mean, this stuff really did become popular. And then I believe in the 70s, they needed to get some money, and they sold the rights to a lot of their characters. And when they decided to try making movies, it didn't totally work. Like you say, Ang Lee's Hulk, and like some of these movies that came out before.
Which we've already said that we both enjoyed that movie, but that's such an interesting case, because when you hire the director of The Ice Storm and Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon, I don't know what they were expecting. I guess there was an opportunity for him to do sort of the prestige superhero, what Christopher Nolan ultimately did with Batman. That could have started. That could have started with Hulk, but that's not what he did. Instead, he made a very bizarre and quirky film. That's certainly why I enjoyed it. Where also the Hulk looks like shit. Like, the CGI at the time looked horrible. Like, what's fun about the movie is definitely not the Hulk. Like, all the things that I guess are supposed to be enjoyable about it. But,
right.
And that's why I'm sure, at least from their perspective, that movie was a failure.
Yeah.
But there's a path that could have been taken with that movie that wasn't.
Yeah. So what they ended up doing was they made movies like that. They weren't very successful. I think the most successful thing that had kind of been done was Spider-Man, which kind of got some stuff. But if I'm not mistaken, they didn't even produce that. They had sold the rights to Sony, who still retain the rights today. They didn't have the rights to half their characters. They didn't even really have the rights to the Hulk, which is why if you watch all the movies, you'll notice he doesn't have another movie all to himself. He's allowed to show up in movies that do not have him as the titular character. There's I don't want to say which one, but he actually shows up as basically one of the main characters in another movie. You don't know that. It's such a good reveal. About halfway through the movie, he suddenly shows up, and then you realize, oh, he's the other half of this movie. Okay, that's what's going on. That is another hurdle they had to go over. I mean, their arms are being held behind their backs. Like, they don't have the Fantastic Four, which is the most favorite group.
Oh, that's interesting.
So they can't produce movies with their favorite things, which is why this was like, okay, fine, screw you, world. We do have the rights to these second banana characters that we're going to turn into the biggest fucking deal in the entire fucking world. Fuck you, Star Wars. Here's our thing. And it did win. Guardians, I think, was the first one where it's like, oh, you've got kind of a deep story here about the mom, at least as far as a superhero movie can go, where there's characters aren't necessarily good or evil. You know, I think Lee Pace's character is just more evil, but you start to play with maybe there's some moral ambiguity. Like, what is Yondu? Mm-hmm. Is he good? Is he bad? That's an arbitrary question. What is good? What is bad? I don't think it's a right question to ask. In movies that set up that sort of dichotomy, they're probably relatively simple anyway. This is the first one where you get a little more nuance. As you said, oh, mom has cancer. Like, what superhero movie kind of gets there immediately? Yeah. And then has some really sweet moments where family is where you find it. Love is what it is. The fact that the mom's love is what spurs him into everything. Yeah. Like, that's not typical in a superhero movie. It's a little more...
even then, the movie sort of sets a tone because you don't want to trivialize cancer, but you can't take it too seriously. Otherwise, you're making a different film.
Yes, exactly.
So that's why James Gunn was an interesting choice. There's like a slight... Coming from me, this is a good thing. There's a slight schlockiness, I think, underlying it.
Oh, yes. Quite intentional. They want this to be slightly larger than life.
Right. And that's why it works. Otherwise, you're like, oh, shit, what are we... Where are we going?
Right. No, and you could make this, yeah.
One of the difficulties I have is... I could see the Disney machine sort of working the way it's supposed to, but it does feel like a machine to me. On a certain level, it feels like a machine churning out product. You know what I mean?
Yes.
When I talked about bringing back the pastry analogy, it's like the movies, either the superhero movies, the sort of blockbusters that I tend to enjoy the most is when a director like Sam Raimi, who I know directed one of these.
Yes.
And I am kind of curious about that. I don't know how accessible that one would be.
I think you'd like it. I mean, you need to see Doctor Strange.
Yeah.
Probably like Infinity War and Endgame to get what's going on in that one, but you could also maybe sit down and watch it.
What I've noticed, though, is that anytime he's done any of his sort of directorial flourishes, it tends to be mocked because it stands out. When he does like a Sam Raimi type of thing, there's like, what the fuck is this doing in this movie?
Oh, it's got some. I mean, it's not full on, Evil Dead, but it's got elements of it for sure.
Yeah, but I mean, that's the type of stuff I really respond to, sort of the language of cinema, meaning like the way it's told with the camera, which for me, this movie did not deliver on that front. Again, it's a solid production. Like, everything is top level in terms of effects and design and all that stuff. But like, I'm going to give a tiny example. I like the fact that Peter, his ship is kind of like a dorm room. There's even a woman there who he forgets was there. Also, everyone comments on how messy it is. But the thing is, you don't get a sense of the messiness just from observing it. You don't get the sense that there's dishes, there's laundry sitting around. Right. For me, what would take it a step further is that you get that visceral sense in the design of the movie where it's like, ugh, his spaceship's a fucking dump. You know what I mean? And like, whereas there's a kind of manicured quality to this and to everything.
Very astute. I don't disagree with you. I know exactly what you mean, that there's a pristineness to the dirtiness. Yeah.
Even though with James Gunn in particular, there is a more irreverent quality to this, which I don't know if that's present exactly in the other one.
So it really depends on the director and the tone. I mean, like, as you say, there's an irreverence. You remember when he picks up the orb and is about to give it to Benicio del Toro and then he drops it?
Yeah.
100%. Mistake that they just were like, no, that's so funny. Oh my God, that's so perfect for Peter Quill. Like, he's trying to be so cool and is just kind of a doofus and like a lovable goofball. And so like, that's the sort of stuff they left in.
Right.
That would not be in, I would say, Captain America.
Right.
Captain America is a much more straightforward, he's great, he's awesome. And for better or worse, I think for better. There's a seriousness to the Captain Americas that the second one is trying to be like 3 Days of the Condor. In fact, they even get Robert Redford to be in it just to kind of hit it home that like this is an old 70s like spy flick, but it takes itself really seriously. Doctor Strange, one of the reasons I debated between this one and Doctor Strange, but it's a little more serious in tone. It's fun. It's very funny. It's got some very funny elements, but it's a little more serious. So I thought, let's start with like a funnier one.
Yeah. The humor really worked for me. There's a joke that a lot of the humor in these movies tends to be, oh, well, that happened.
Right.
And I don't know if that's the Joss Whedon influence, because I know he's done some of these. No, in general, it worked in this movie. It gets a bit edgelord with there's the whole thing about the prosthetic leg being stolen. It's like, I just thought it'd be funny. But
yeah. There's some stuff I realize I don't want to say because when you watch the third one, it's actually kind of interesting. But,
okay. God, so even that's a setup for a later payoff. Interesting.
I don't know if they intended it to be. Some people have drawn, I think it's a bit of like a backronym type of thing where they're like backwards looking and saying, oh, do you see? But someone made a good case that it wasn't as arbitrary.
Right.
It's for a bigger joke.
Okay.
I mean, James Gunn was behind all three, so who knows? It might very well have been that, or they made the third one to fit well with it. I don't know.
Right.
But it is fun. I mean, I think that sort of stuff is kind of funny. You know, it is very irreverent.
Are you still following them?
Yes.
Because I know they're in phase 4.
I believe they're in phase 5.
5? Is it 5?
Oh, yeah. They're well into phase 5.
No, I have no idea. All I know is that seemingly because of Infinity War and Endgame offers some kind of climax, it seems like a lot of people are tapping out a little bit, just in the sense that, like, as we know, the biggest movies of the year are Barbie and Oppenheimer.
Right.
I think the top movies of the last year, not a single superhero movie. So it does seem like the sheen is starting to wear off.
Unfortunately, the first phase, which was the gamble, was shooting for. The goal was, if we can get this, it's going to end with Infinity War and Endgame. That was where they wanted to end.
Right.
When that ended, the dust cleared and you're like, yeah, now what? And I do know people who have just lost interest. They're like, I've done it. I've watched 23 movies. I've watched some shows. Like, I'm really, really good. I'm a completist in general anyway. And I kind of, I still feel guilty for never having finished Heroes. I've heard it just got worse and worse.
See, that was the sense in which I was always sort of defending Scorsese, where it's like, okay, well, how many of these do you have to see before you write them off when there's 20 of them?
But where I was going to go with this is that the irony is that where they went after it, I actually thought was incredible. I thought like WandaVision and Loki, I think are my favorite things they've done. And they're just shooting for the stars on those and absolutely landing them. Spoilers, but like WandaVision being this throwback loving of old television and doing it. Just the body language of Paul Bettany. That's Dick Van Dyke's lean from the Dick Van Dyke Show.
Oh, yeah.
This is so nuanced. Loki being this really poignant exploration of a flawed character.
Yeah, see, I didn't say this before. I have actually seen the first episode of Loki. My father-in-law put it on. And I didn't want to say in the room, but I did not enjoy it.
Well, no, I would imagine you didn't. But when you see him in the other movies and all that he does, you see how much growth he makes. So Loki became pretty much my favorite character in the whole series. There's a lot that I've actually liked better from Phase 4. So I'm still really hopeful and holding out that this is all building towards something else. And in a very similar way, it was hard to tell what their next goal was, which is I think why people petered out. They're like, okay, now we're just back to like WandaVision, the end. And it's like, no, there's something bigger growing here.
I wondered if there was an element of like with Twin Peaks when they solve the murder and they're like, okay.
Very good analogy. I mean, for me, my reaction was actually like, great, you solved that mystery. What's the next thing you guys are going to do? And apparently, like everyone else is like, oh, what's the point? I'm like, the point is to watch these characters that I've grown to love. Why do you need to have this mystery? Why do you need the MacGuffin? I didn't need it for that. I don't need it for this.
I'm sure someday we'll do a Twin Peaks episode, but Twin Peaks, another thing where you can't skip anything.
No.
Which I found out the hard way, mostly because...
What did you do?
Well, no. Well, here's the thing. I remember I tried to start watching it in the 90s, maybe about 5 years after it aired, but the 2-hour pilot was not released on VHS. So
Jesus.
I tried to start watching from episode 1 and just completely lost. Like, if you don't set up...
just like Firefly.
Yeah.
You don't have that 90-minute pilot. You're just like, what is going on?
Yeah. And I had no way of getting it. It was the 90s. I couldn't just torrent it. I didn't know anyone with a copy.
Wait, you torrented?
No, I'm not saying me, but other people. those shady people.
Yeah. Had a friend who,
I've
you
known
watched it
people
with.
who've done it, and I don't approve.
You can just say, yeah, I couldn't just go to
It's a
CBS All
thing
Access and watch it. Yeah.
So I had to wait years, and so about 10 years later, it came out on DVD.
Sure.
So I finally saw season 1, but there was no season 2. And so again, I had to
Wow.
wait a long time. And I'm like, well, season 2 is unavailable to me. Oh, but there's a movie, and the movie's a prequel, so I should be able to watch that and not be lost. Wait.
No, it's a prequel. It's a true prequel.
No, but I was still completely lost with the movie too.
Yeah.
So it's like,
Speaking of that, actually, some people will argue you should watch these movies in story chronological order. In other words, start with Captain America, then watch Captain Marvel,
Yeah.
and then I highly recommend against it for a couple reasons. One, the post-credit sequences really start giving away stuff. The other thing is, I think these movies came out and they were building towards something.
mm-hmm.
And if you watch something like Captain Marvel, it is drawing on a bigger thing. I think they work really, really well in the order that they came out.
Yeah, I've noticed that Disney Plus, which we are not promoting,
We're not
the app,
yeah.
which has these movies, which will remain nameless. They have an option where it's
chronological
in story order. Yeah,
And again, I'm probably going to get a lot of flack in the comments here, but if that's the way you want to do it, I'm just not a judgment. I just personally, I don't really like to do things that way anyway. I like to just watch things. So let me ask you this. You've worded it this way. You enjoyed the movie and understood the appeal.
yes.
Has your appeal been piqued enough to want to continue and watch more? No offense if the answer is no.
Like I said, for the first time, I can see the appeal, almost more like an observer, as in, I don't know if I can be a participant, but I can see it.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, like, it would be interesting to be able to watch, say, Infinity War and actually feel something when I know what's going to happens. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, at this point, I would say do one of two things. I mentioned in the first half, Doctor Strange.
Mm-hmm.
It was really good on an IMAX in 3D. It's going to be still really good, I think, if you watch it. I would say either watch that or just go back and muscle through phase 1 because they do really start to get up to here. I think that would be my next step for you.
No, I think you've succeeded in making me less of a crank. People are probably still going to be upset with me. But
That's okay. They're going to be upset with me too, I'm sure, because we're not.
They're just going to be upset.
Because you and I are.
There's no net gain to this being released. I mean, only in the cynical way that if people are going to listen just to be mad at us.
Maybe. I mean,
while
I don't
we
know.
rake in the hate.
You have
clicks,
more experience with that for sure. But
What are you
mean,
suggesting?
that you've produced a lot of popular content over the last 10 years. So that's what I'm
thank you.
suggesting.
Oh, no, I wasn't going to bring that up. My Jeremiah content on YouTube.
Oh, you got
I wasn't
me.
going to mention my other life. No, this is a totally different thing.
Totally different. Yeah, no, I think that our levels of fandom here being like somewhere between casual and interested, I'll watch them. I like them. I've watched all these movies through twice.
Yeah.
Well, I haven't watched a lot of movies twice.
That's not nothing.
Yeah. So
ultimately, I want to enjoy things.
you will, and I think you'll enjoy things like Loki more. So
Oh my goodness, you just produced a
Loki doll.
Loki doll.
Which was given to me along with a Loki for President pin. So people know how much I love Loki.
Didn't know you felt that way.
Yeah.
President, I don't know.
No, there's a joke there that I will only spoil after you'd need to have seen the first two, Thor and...
How many of these do I have to see to get your jokes? How many?
Just watch them all.
This podcast was produced by Magali McDonald, edited by me. Music was by Silken Sommers. Please check out their Bandcamp. Follow us at Skip First Ep Pod on Instagram, Bluesky, that site that used to be Twitter. And finally, if you enjoyed our podcast, please consider giving us a rating on your preferred app. Every little bit helps.